Albert Fish was born Hamilton Howard Fish on May 19, 1870, in Washington, D.C. He would grow up to become one of America's most notorious and reviled murderers, earning nicknames like the Gray Man, the Brooklyn Vampire, and the Boogeyman. Though his body was frail and his demeanor often polite and grandfatherly, Fish harbored unspeakable compulsions that ultimately culminated in crimes so heinous that even seasoned lawmen were horrified by his confessions. Fish's story is a harrowing glimpse into the darkest recesses of the human psyche. It is a narrative shaped by family mental illness, early trauma, religious delusions, and the chilling contrast between an apparently harmless exterior and monstrous deeds hidden from public view. Hamilton Howard Fish was the youngest of 4 children born to Randall and Ellen Fish. His father, Randall, was 43 years older than Ellen, a significant age gap that reflected the unusual dynamics in which Fish was raised. Randall was 75 years old at the time of Albert's birth and struggled to support his family financially. Fish's lineage was riddled with mental illness. Several relatives suffered from severe psychiatric conditions, including hallucinations, institutionalization, and religious mania. Fish himself would later speak of a brother who was confined to a state mental hospital and an uncle who suffered from religious delusions. When Fish was only 5 years old, his father died of a heart attack while waiting for a streetcar. His mother, unable to care for him financially, placed young Albert in St. John's Orphanage in Washington, D.C. The institution became a crucible for trauma. The children there were frequently beaten and punished for minor infractions. The sound of whippings, the cries of children, and the cruel discipline left indelible marks on Fish's mind. At age 9, Fish returned to live with his mother. However, by then, his psychological damage was evident. He grew into a shy, socially awkward child who struggled to connect with others. Classmates found him peculiar. As a teenager, he began experimenting with bizarre acts, such as drinking urine and consuming raw meat. By the time Fish was in his 20s, he was living in New York City, scraping by with odd jobs as a painter and handyman. He lived in a city bursting with rapid growth, shifting immigrant populations, and widespread poverty, a fertile environment for someone who could blend in unnoticed. In 1898, at the age of 28, he married Anna Mary Hoffman, who was 9 years his junior. The marriage produced 6 children: Albert, Anna, Gertrude, Eugene, John, and Henry. For a time, Fish seemed to live a conventional life. He worked to support his family and maintained the appearance of an ordinary man. However, even during these years, Fish led a secret double life. He frequented public baths, began practicing self-flagellation, and engaged in private rituals that satisfied his compulsions for pain and humiliation. He also began writing obscene letters to women whose names he found in matrimonial or classified advertisements, describing bizarre sexual fantasies and requesting violent acts. In 1917, Fish's life took a sharp downward turn when his wife, Anna, left him for another man. The abandonment devastated Fish, leaving him alone to raise 6 children. He reportedly sank deeper into depression and became increasingly consumed by delusions and compulsions. Despite his deteriorating mental health, Fish continued to work as a painter. His children later recalled that he never physically harmed them, but his behavior was strange and unsettling. He would randomly recite Bible passages about sacrifice and suffering, and at times he forced himself to endure physical pain as a form of penance. By the 1920s, Fish was drifting through New York City's working-class neighborhoods, offering odd jobs and handyman services. He used these jobs as opportunities to scout potential victims. Fish's primary targets were young children, boys and girls alike, particularly those from poor or immigrant families who might not be missed quickly. Fish's methods were chillingly manipulative. He presented himself as a kind, elderly man who spoke gently and offered treats, jobs, or errands to unsuspecting children. Once he gained their trust, he lured them away to secluded places. His acts of violence were premeditated and often infused with religious delusions. He claimed he believed he was carrying out God's will, punishing the innocent as a form of sacrifice. Fish's confessions suggest that the number of children he assaulted may have been much higher than those officially documented. He claimed to have harmed children in nearly every state he visited as a transient worker. Many disappearances during this era went unsolved, leaving speculation that Fish may have been responsible for far more victims than confirmed. Throughout the 1920s, Fish became known as the Gray Man among those investigating child disappearances. The nickname referred both to his drab clothing and to his ability to slip unnoticed into any community. To neighbors and landlords, he was a polite, if eccentric, elderly man. He carried an air of gentility, referring to himself as a man of Christian principles, and seemed utterly harmless. Police were baffled by a series of missing children cases. Fish's unassuming appearance helped him evade suspicion. Meanwhile, he continued to send obscene letters to strangers, describing violent fantasies involving torture and punishment. The crime that would ultimately bring Albert Fish to justice began in May 1928. Edward Budd, an 18-year-old Manhattan youth, placed an advertisement in a newspaper seeking work on a farm. Fish, spotting the ad, concocted a scheme that would pivot his focus from Edward to Edward's younger sister. Fish visited the Budd family, posing as Frank Howard, a wealthy farmer from Farmingdale, New York. He claimed he wished to hire Edward and possibly his friend for farm work. Fish returned several times to the Budd residence, charming the family and weaving tales of his farm and his supposed wealth. During these visits, Fish met Grace Budd, Edward's 10-year-old sister. Grace was shy, polite, and seemed captivated by the gentle, grandfatherly man. Fish's plan shifted almost immediately. Instead of hiring Edward, he decided to abduct Grace. On June 3, 1928, Fish arrived at the Budd household, claiming he needed to attend his niece's birthday party, and asked if Grace could accompany him. Trusting him entirely, the Budd family allowed Grace to leave with Fish. It was the last time they would see her alive. Grace's disappearance sparked widespread panic and a citywide investigation. Detectives initially suspected Edward Budd himself, theorizing that the job offer was a ruse for a romantic entanglement gone wrong. Yet no evidence linked Edward to his sister's disappearance. Meanwhile, Frank Howard vanished without a trace. Years passed with no clues about Grace's fate. The Budd family endured immense grief and the torment of not knowing what had happened to their daughter. In November 1934, over 6 years after Grace's disappearance, the Budd family received a letter that would shock them and provide police with their first real lead. The letter was written in rambling, archaic language, peppered with references to biblical passages and religious penance. Fish confessed to abducting Grace, describing how he had taken her and killed her. While parts of the letter contained horrific details that would never be printed in newspapers, it also offered Fish's bizarre rationale. He claimed that God had commanded him to carry out the murder as a sacrifice. Though the letter was disturbing beyond words, it finally gave investigators clues to trace the sender. Police analyzed the stationery, leading them to a boarding house in Manhattan. After interviewing witnesses and examining records, they discovered Fish's true identity. On December 13, 1934, police arrested Albert Fish at his rooming house. When confronted about Grace Budd, Fish initially denied involvement. However, after further questioning, he confessed calmly and in astonishing detail. He described how he had lured Grace away, the events that followed, and his motivations. Fish's confessions went far beyond Grace Budd. He claimed responsibility for the deaths of other children, although verifying these confessions proved challenging. Fish spoke in a detached manner, as though recounting mundane events, which deeply unnerved the detectives listening to him. Medical examinations at Sing Sing prison later revealed over 24 needles lodged in his pelvic region, a testament to his compulsive self-harm over many years. Prison staff described Fish as one of the most disturbed individuals they had ever encountered. Albert Fish was charged with first-degree murder for the death of Grace Budd. His defense centered on insanity. His attorneys presented overwhelming evidence of his mental illness, including delusions, religious hallucinations, and his bizarre practices of self-mutilation. Fish himself testified about voices commanding him to commit violent acts, insisting that he was following divine orders. However, the prosecution argued that Fish knew his actions were wrong, pointing to his efforts to conceal his identity and flee after the murder. His behavior, they claimed, showed planning and consciousness of guilt. The trial, held in March 1935, captivated the nation. Reporters documented every bizarre utterance from Fish, and public fascination with his case reached fever pitch. After 10 days of deliberation, the jury found Fish guilty but sane. They sentenced him to death in the electric chair. On January 16, 1936, Albert Fish was executed at Sing Sing Prison in Ossining, New York. He reportedly went to his death without fear. Rumors circulated afterward that the needles in his body caused sparks or electrical malfunctions during his electrocution, though official records do not support this story. Witnesses described Fish as composed to the end. Before his execution, he remarked that he considered it the supreme thrill of my life. Such statements only reinforced the monstrous image the public had formed of him. Albert Fish remains one of the most chilling figures in American criminal history. Unlike serial killers who seek fame or public recognition, Fish maintained a shadowy existence, blending into society while concealing unimaginable depravity. His crimes highlighted weaknesses in early 20th century social systems. Many of his victims were children from impoverished families or immigrants whose disappearances were not immediately pursued by law enforcement. Fish exploited poverty and trust, presenting himself as a harmless old man. Fish's life remains a haunting case study in the convergence of severe mental illness, religious fanaticism, and violent sexual compulsion. His story continues to appear in books, documentaries, and true crime discussions, serving both as a warning about evil hidden in plain sight and as a grim testament to the depths of human depravity. Albert Fish's name still echoes as one of history's most frightening examples of how a seemingly ordinary man can harbor darkness beyond imagination.